I work security at a small office building in downtown Phoenix. It's not glamorous, but the pay is decent and I usually just sit at the front desk, watch Netflix, and do my rounds every couple hours. The building houses a few small businesses, an accounting firm, a marketing agency, and some kind of tech startup on the third floor. I'd been working there for about 6 months when this happened. It was a Tuesday night in late October, around 2 a.m. The building was completely empty except for me, which was normal. I was halfway through an episode of The Office when I heard the elevator ding. That got my attention immediately. The elevators are old and loud, and I definitely hadn't called one. I muted my laptop and listened. Nothing. Maybe it was just the building settling or some mechanical issue. These old elevators sometimes moved on their own when the building's heating system kicked in. I went back to watching my show, but I couldn't really focus. Something felt off. After about 10 minutes, I decided to do an early round just to check things out. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the stairwell. The second floor was quiet, exactly how I'd left it during my 11 p.m. rounds. All the offices were locked, all the lights were off. I checked each door handle anyway, just part of the routine. Everything seemed normal. When I got to the third floor, I immediately noticed something different. There was a faint light coming from under one of the office doors. The tech startup, I think it was called Nexus Solutions or something like that. I'd never seen anyone there during my shifts, and I was pretty sure they didn't have anyone working nights. I knocked on the door. Hello? Security here. Is anyone in there? No response. I tried the handle. Locked, like always. But that light was definitely on. I could see it clearly under the door, and it looked like the bluish glow of a computer screen. I pulled out my phone to call my supervisor, but realized how stupid that would sound. Hey Jim, there's a light on in an office. He'd probably just tell me to make a note in the logbook and move on. Instead, I decided to wait it out. Maybe someone was working late and just didn't hear me knock. I found a chair in the hallway and sat down where I could see the door. If someone came out, I'd check their ID and make sure they were supposed to be there. 20 minutes passed. The light stayed on, but I didn't hear any typing, phone calls, or movement. Just silence. That's when I heard a chair rolling across the floor. It was that distinct sound of office chair wheels on cheap carpet. Someone was definitely in there. I knocked again, louder this time. Excuse me. Security. I need to speak with you. Still nothing. I was starting to get annoyed. Look, I'm not trying to hassle anyone who's working late, but building policy is that I need to know who's in the building after hours. I knocked one more time and waited another few minutes. The light went out. Just like that, it was dark under the door again. I heard what sounded like footsteps moving around inside, but still no one came to the door. I stayed in that hallway for another hour. No one came out. Around 4 a.m., I finally gave up and finished my rounds. When I got back to the front desk, I wrote everything down in the incident log and figured I'd mention it to the day shift guard. The next morning, I called Jim and told him what happened. He said he'd look into it and get back to me. Around 3 p.m., he called me back. I talked to the building manager, he said. Nexus Solutions moved out 3 weeks ago. That office has been empty since early October. My stomach dropped. What do you mean moved out? Lease expired. They cleaned out all their equipment and turned in their keys. The office is completely vacant. I asked him if maybe the cleaning crew or maintenance had been in there, but he said no work was scheduled for that night. Are you sure about what you saw? He asked. I told him I was absolutely sure. The light, the chair rolling, the footsteps, all of it was real. Jim was quiet for a moment. Then he said, look, I'm going to have the building manager check the office today, just to be safe. But between you and me, you might want to cut back on the caffeine during your shifts. The building manager found the office completely empty. No furniture, no computers, nothing. Just bare carpet with those little indentations where the desk legs used to be. I still work there, and I still do my rounds every night. But I don't linger on the third floor anymore. Sometimes, when I'm walking past that empty office, I swear I can see a faint glow under the door from the corner of my eye. But when I turn to look directly, it's always dark. Maybe Jim was right about the caffeine. Or maybe some people just don't know when it's time to leave. This happened to me last summer when I was 19. My girlfriend Sarah and I decided to go camping in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. We're both pretty experienced hikers, so we wanted to try a more remote trail that we'd found online. It was supposed to be this hidden gem, a 6-mile hike to a secluded lake where you could camp for free. The trailhead was about 3 hours from Seattle, and we got there around 2 p.m. on a Friday. The parking area was just a small dirt lot with maybe room for 10 cars, and ours was the only one there. That should have been our first red flag, but we were excited to have the whole place to ourselves. The trail started out normal enough, well marked with those wooden signs every half mile. But after about 2 miles, the signs just stopped. The path was still there, but it was getting narrower and more overgrown. Sarah mentioned that maybe we should turn back, but I convinced her to keep going. I had downloaded the GPS coordinates, and my phone showed we were still heading in the right direction. About an hour later, we came across something weird. There was this makeshift camp setup just off the trail, a blue tarp stretched between some trees and what looked like someone's belongings scattered around. But everything was covered in leaves and looked like it had been there for months. There were hiking boots, a sleeping bag that was completely soaked through, and a backpack that looked like animals had gotten into it. Someone probably just abandoned their gear, Sarah said, but I could tell she was getting uncomfortable. We kept hiking, and about 30 minutes later, we found the lake. It was actually beautiful crystal clear water surrounded by pine trees and these massive rocks. We set up our tent on a flat spot about 50 feet from the shore and got a campfire going. For a while, everything felt perfect. As the sun started setting, we were sitting by the fire eating dinner when Sarah grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened carefully. There was definitely something, voices coming from across the lake. They were too far away to make out words, but it sounded like multiple people having a heated conversation. The weird thing was, we hadn't seen any other hikers on the trail, and there was only one way in and out. "Maybe there's another trail we don't know about," I suggested, but even as I said it, something felt off about those voices. Around 10 p.m., the voices stopped completely. The silence was almost worse than the talking. Every little sound, a branch cracking, the wind in the trees, made us both jump. We decided to go to bed early and get an early start in the morning. I was just starting to fall asleep when Sarah shook me awake. "There's someone outside," she whispered, her voice shaking. I held my breath and listened. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our tent. They would stop for a few seconds, then continue. It sounded like someone was trying to be quiet but not really succeeding. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but Sarah grabbed my hand and shook her head. We just lay there, completely frozen, listening to someone walk around our campsite for what felt like hours. Then the footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I could hear breathings heavy, like someone who had been hiking hard. Sarah was gripping my arm so tight it hurt. We waited, barely breathing ourselves. After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away toward the lake. We heard splashing, like someone wading into the water. Then nothing. We didn't sleep at all that night. As soon as the sun came up, we packed everything as quietly as possible and got the heck out of there. The hike back felt twice as long, and we kept looking over our shoulders the whole time. When we finally got back to the parking lot, there was a park ranger waiting by our car. He looked relieved to see us. "You folks okay?" he asked. "We've been trying to reach hikers in this area all night." That's when he told us that the trail we'd been on was actually closed. There had been a missing person case from 3 months earlier, a solo hiker who never came back from that exact lake. His car had been found in this same parking lot, but they never found him or any of his gear. "We think you might have found his campsite," the ranger said when I described the abandoned gear we'd seen. "We're going to send a team up there this week to investigate." But here's the part that still gives me chills. When I asked about other hikers who might have been up there, the ranger looked confused. "Other hikers? You two were the only ones we knew about. That's why we were worried when we couldn't reach you on the radio." Sarah and I just looked at each other. We told him about the voices across the lake and the footsteps around our tent. His expression got really serious. "I need you to come to the station and file a report," he said. "This might be related to the missing person case." We spent 2 hours at the ranger station that day, going over every detail. They never told us exactly what they were thinking, but I could tell they were taking it seriously. A week later, I checked the local news online. They'd found the missing hiker's body in the lake. He'd apparently drowned, but the weird thing was, they estimated he'd been dead for at least 2 months. So who was walking around our tent that night? And whose voices did we hear across the water? I still go hiking, but I always stick to marked, open trails now. and I never camp alone anymore. This story still gives me chills, even though I'm 24 now and it happened when I was only 7 years old. Some childhood memories fade, but this one has stayed crystal clear in my mind like it happened yesterday. I lived with my parents and my little sister Emma in a small house in suburban Ohio. Emma was only 4 at the time, and we shared a bedroom on the second floor. Our parents' room was down the hall, and they always kept their door cracked open at night in case we needed anything. It was a Tuesday night in November, and I remember because we had just gotten back from trick-or-treating the weekend before. I was still on a sugar high from all the leftover candy, so I was having trouble falling asleep. Around 11 p.m., I heard tapping on our bedroom window. It was a soft, rhythmic sound tap, 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 like someone gently knocking. At first, I thought it was just tree branches in the wind, but then I realized our bedroom was on the second floor and there weren't any trees that close to the house. I sat up in bed and looked toward the window. The curtains were mostly closed, but there was a small gap in the middle. Through that gap, I could see the shadow of someone standing outside on what must have been a ladder. The tapping stopped, and I heard a woman's voice calling softly, "Jessica? Jessica, honey, can you open the window?" That was my name, but something about the voice made my stomach feel weird. It sounded familiar, but not quite right, like when someone has a cold and their voice sounds different. "Jessica, it's Aunt Carol. I need to talk to you, sweetie." Now I was really confused. Aunt Carol was my mom's sister, but she lived in California and I hadn't seen her in over a year. Plus, why would she be outside our window in the middle of the night? Emma was still fast asleep in her bed, so I quietly got up and moved closer to the window. I could see the outline of a woman more clearly now. She was wearing a long coat and had shoulder-length hair like Aunt Carol, but something felt wrong. "Open the window, Jessica. I have something special for you." Her voice was getting more insistent, and that weird feeling in my stomach was getting worse. I wanted to wake up Emma or call for my parents, but I was frozen. The woman kept talking, telling me how much she missed me and how she had driven all the way from California just to see me. But here's the thing that really scared me: I could see her face a little bit through the gap in the curtains, and while she looked like Aunt Carol, her smile was too wide. Like, unnaturally wide, and her eyes looked completely black in the moonlight. "Jessica, don't make me wait out here all night. It's cold, honey. Just unlock the window." That's when I snapped out of it and ran to my parents' room. I shook my mom awake and whispered that Aunt Carol was outside our window and wanted me to let her in. My mom sat up immediately, and her face went completely white. "Carol? Are you sure it was Carol?" I nodded, and she quickly woke up my dad. They both looked really worried, which scared me even more because I'd never seen them react like that to anything. My dad grabbed his phone and called someone while my mom came with me back to our bedroom. We looked out the window together, but whoever had been there was gone. My mom checked that the window was locked and pulled the curtains completely shut. "Mom, why did Aunt Carol leave? Did I do something wrong?" My mom hugged me really tight and said, "Honey, that wasn't Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol is in California, and she would never come to your window like that." The next morning, I asked if we could call Aunt Carol to make sure she was okay. My mom called her right in front of me, and sure enough, Aunt Carol answered from her apartment in Los Angeles. She had been there all week and was confused when my mom asked if she had traveled anywhere recently. But here's what really bothers me to this day. When I described exactly what the woman had said and how she looked, my parents exchanged this look that I didn't understand at the time. It was like they knew something they weren't telling me. A few days later, I overheard my mom on the phone with someone, and she was saying things like she knew Jessica's name and she looked exactly like Carol and we need to be more careful. When I asked my mom who she was talking to, she just said it was nothing and changed the subject. For weeks after that, my parents made sure all our windows were locked before bedtime, and they installed new security lights around the house. They also started closing their bedroom door at night, which they had never done before. I'm an adult now, and I've asked my parents about that night several times over the years. They always give me the same response, that it was probably just someone trying to break into houses and they happened to know my name somehow. But that doesn't explain how she looked exactly like my aunt. And it definitely doesn't explain why my parents seemed to know more than they were telling me. Last year, I was visiting for Christmas and found some old photo albums in the basement. I was looking through pictures from when my mom was younger, and I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a photo of my mom and Aunt Carol when they were teenagers, but there was a third girl with them who looked almost identical to both of them. On the back of the photo, someone had written Sarah, Carol, and Linda 1987. I asked my mom who Linda was, and her face went pale just like it had that night when I was 7. She was our sister, my mom said quietly. She died in a car accident when she was 19. I stared at the photo. Linda looked exactly like what I remembered of the woman at the window. Mom, is there something you're not telling me about that night? She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, some things are better left in the past, Jessica. But I can't leave it in the past. Because now I'm wondering, was it really a stranger at our window that night, or was it something else entirely? This happened when I was 17, during my senior year of high school. I had just gotten my license and was finally allowed to drive myself places, which felt like freedom after years of depending on my parents for rides. It was a Friday night in March, and I was driving home from my job at the local movie theater. I worked the closing shift, so it was around 11:30 p.m. when I left. The theater was about 15 minutes from my house in a small town outside of Denver, and the drive was mostly empty back roads with a few gas stations and fast food places. About halfway home, I realized I was running low on gas. My dad had always told me never to let the tank get below a quarter, but I'd been distracted and hadn't noticed how low it was getting. I pulled into this 24-hour Shell station that I'd been to dozens of times before. The place was pretty much deserted except for one other car parked near the convenience store. I pulled up to pump number 3 and got out to fill up my tank. That's when I noticed the guy. He was probably in his 40s, average height, wearing a baseball cap and a flannel shirt. He was leaning against his car, which was a dark blue pickup truck, just watching me. Not really doing anything, just staring. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was waiting for someone or just spacing out. But when I glanced over again, he was still looking directly at me. He gave me this weird smile and waved. I quickly finished pumping gas and headed toward the store to pay. The cashier was this older guy who looked half asleep behind bulletproof glass. I paid for my gas and bought a Coke, mostly just to kill time and see if the creepy guy would leave. When I walked back outside, the man was standing right next to my car. "Hey there," he said, still with that uncomfortable smile. "Nice car. Is this your first one?" I mumbled thanks and tried to get to my driver's side door, but he stepped closer, blocking my path. "I'm Rick," he said, extending his hand. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Every alarm bell in my head was going off. I didn't shake his hand and just said, "I need to get going." Don't be in such a hurry," he said. "It's a nice night for a chat. You look like you go to the high school here. What grade are you in?" That's when I really started to panic. I managed to get around him and into my car, but as I was starting the engine, he knocked on my window. "Hey, I was talking to you," he said, and his friendly demeanor was starting to slip. That's not very polite. I backed out of the parking space as quickly as I could and headed toward the road. In my rearview mirror, I could see him getting into his truck. Sure enough, about 30 seconds later, I saw his headlights behind me. At first, I thought it might be a coincidence. There was really only one main road that led back toward town. But when I made the turn toward my neighborhood, he followed. I was trying not to panic, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I decided to test whether he was actually following me by taking a longer route home. Instead of going straight, I turned left into a residential area and started winding through side streets. He followed every single turn. I pulled out my phone and called my dad. "Dad, I think someone's following me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" he asked immediately. I told him about the gas station and described where I was driving. He told me not to come home and to drive to the police station instead. "I'm getting in the car right now," he said. "Stay on the phone with me." The police station was only about 5 minutes away, but it felt like the longest drive of my life. The truck stayed behind me the whole time, sometimes getting close enough that I could see the guy's face in my rearview mirror. When I pulled into the police station parking lot, I expected him to drive away. Instead, he pulled in right behind me and parked. I ran inside and told the officer at the front desk what was happening. He walked outside with me, and that's when things got really scary. The man was standing next to my car again, looking through the windows with his hands cupped against the glass. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," the officer called out. The guy looked up and immediately got defensive. "I was just trying to help her," he said. She looked lost. The officer asked for his ID and started questioning him. It turns out, he had a record for stalking and harassment. They arrested him right there in the parking lot. Later, the police told my parents that this guy had been following young girls for months, but they'd never been able to catch him in the act before. My dad installed a GPS tracker in my car after that, and I never stopped at that gas station again. Even now, 5 years later, I always check my surroundings when I'm alone at night. The scariest part is thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't called my dad when I did.